Okay, let us begin our live Q&A where I am answering questions sent in by email because I posted yesterday or something. Alrighty, so let's do them in order that they were received. Let's see how many we can get through. Okay. So I won't give names because you never know when people don't want their names. I'll just give initials. AJ asks, how can one realize what one's past life karmas are? In my humble opinion, it is very much necessary for a being to realize the same in order to progress. So the question is, how do you understand what your past life was? The answer was given in the Bhagavatam stream. After Narada told the story of Puranjana, then the person who heard the story of Barishat asked a question about why should we be affected by things in our next life, things that we do in this life, why should they affect us in our next life? Narada answers that question, and in answering that question, he explains how you can understand what your past life was. So please, you can find that stream on my channel page. You believe that it's very necessary to know what your past life is, but Narada and myself, if I can put the two in the same sentence, don't agree. It's not very necessary. If it is very necessary to know what you're doing, if it's necessary for your spiritual growth to know your past life, then God is pretty stupid, or whoever, the gods are pretty stupid for not making it something that people know. In fact, it's not important. If it was important, it wouldn't be obscured or hidden. It's actually kind of important that it is obscured or hidden, otherwise you can't get on with your current life. It's not important to understand any of the details of your past lives. It's interesting, it's fascinating, it's curious, it's trivia, but it's not important. The reason why it's not important is just, for example, unfortunately, I know some people who have experienced severe traumas. It's not unfortunate that I know them, it's unfortunate that they experienced the traumas. They block out the memories of those events, but do you think that those experiences don't affect them? So actually, we don't need to know what we did in the past life. You need to know what you're supposed to do now. So that is not important. Basically, Narada's response to that is, you can understand from your skills and talents and proclivities in this life what you were doing in your last life. All right, next question from S.A. 2 questions. First question, people from the same family have different sun or moon placement, showing different personalities of parents. Is it because they experience the same parent differently? I have 3 children, moon in Purva Bhadrapada, moon in Chitra, and moon in Rohini. How to reconcile? So, her question is, moon represents mother, right? So I'm one mother, but I have 3 kids. So one of their charts has moon in Purva Phalguni, Purva Bhadrapada. Another one has moon in Chitra. Another one has moon in Rohini. But so it's like 3 different people being described as the mother, but there's just one mother. So she's wondering if it is because they experience the same parent differently. That's a okay way to answer it. It's because they have different experiences of the parent. Remember, your child's chart is your child's chart. It's not a picture of you. It's a picture of your child. The It's a picture of the moon signifies the mother, but the moon signifies their mind, which is how they processed the experience of their mother. So that is fine. That is one good way to answer it. The other good way to answer it is you're oversimplifying, and this is a problem that you will always run into if you oversimplify. The oversimplification is that there's only one thing that represents the mother, and that's the moon. So, for example, you've completely forgotten about the fourth house. Just for example, and the fourth house lord, and other things which represent the mother. What about the D12, which represents parents? So that's the other important thing to understand is in any one of your children's charts, the picture, the way that they experience you is not only represented by the moon or the sun. It's represented by a combination of moon, fourth lord, fourth house, to be rather simple. Okay. So going to the next question that was received by email, because that's how I'm taking the questions. Oh wait, she had a part 2. Question 2. Pending karma, how is it seen? Sixth house, Saturn's position, or sixth from Saturn? Pending karma. Define pending karma. What the heck is pending karma? What is pending karma? What is karma? Karma is based on the word karya, which means to do something. When you do something, and then that sets events in motion, and events have repercussions. So karma means doing something, and it implies the repercussion to an action. So when you say pending karma, it probably means things which you have set in motion which have not yet come to their fruition. Right? For example, if I deposit money in a bank account, the bank may say this transaction is pending. That means I've already put the money in, but it's not really done doing what it's supposed to do yet. It doesn't have its results yet. So I think you mean, how would you see pending karma? That is all of the karma. How would you see pending karma? You look at the chart. The entire chart is your pending karma. Don't you understand? Maybe you have a different definition of pending karma, in which case that's what you need to clarify first. What do you mean by pending karma? Okay, next question. OC. Nope, that's not a question for this. Now we have V. My question, what will happen to all of your Vedic astrology knowledge? The software project you are working on. I'm not working on a software project. The notes that you never shared with anyone. I share all my notes with everybody, etc. After your death, is someone going to continue your work, or will it be released to the public? I hope you don't find this question too personal or offensive in any way. Who knows? It's none of my business. That's my answer. So we had 3 things. Vedic astrology knowledge, software project you were working on, notes that you never shared with anybody. So as for Vedic astrology knowledge, it's knowledge is stored in the mind, and the mind is contiguous between bodies. So you access knowledge in the previous life fairly. You access knowledge gained in a previous life fairly easily in the next life. That's one of the things that Narada said to Barishat. He said that the subjects which you very easily, quickly master without having to learn, the reason why you've done them, the reason why you can do that is because you've already put in the effort to study it. Software project you were working on, I am not working on a software project. And the notes that I never share with anybody, I pretty much share everything. And that's the end of your question. Next. 2 questions from IN. When 2 retrograde planets exchange their houses, will it be considered exaltation? Why? Why? I wish you guys could go to astrological kindergarten. It's like saying if you mix a banana and a pear in a blender, will it be considered an apple? That's what this question is like. If 2 retrograde planets exchange their houses, will it be considered exaltation? I mean, exaltation means a planet is in a certain sign. How would 2 retrograde planets? You guys need to clean up your understanding of the basics. Question 2. All right, so let me try to be better with question 1. So you probably mean, is it very good? That would be helpful if you could stop asking if it's exaltation and say what you actually mean. Is it really good if 2 retrograde planets exchange their house? When planets exchange their houses, it's generally very good. To have a house exchange is generally very good. The exception to that, where it becomes questionable, is if a soft house or an easy house, if a soft and a hard house exchange, or if an easy and a difficult house exchange. For example, if 1 and 8 exchange, then you have kind of easy and difficult. Or soft and hard if you have like 4 and 3 exchanging. Those can be difficult, but in general, the house exchange itself is an empowering thing. It's a good thing because you're connecting circuits. Whether they're retrograde or not really doesn't make any difference. Okay, people also need to realize that we are answering questions from emails. So this way, people that actually have my email somehow or another, probably because I interacted with them in the past, they get priority to ask the questions. And they can think about their question a little bit more, so maybe they could word it a little bit more clearly. Question number 2 from IN. How can we find if 2 people are meant to be together? I have met some guys who have my Lagna as their 7th house, and sometimes their Venus will be in my ascendant nakshatra, but it did not work out. I just keep telling you guys that you can't be so simple. It's like you're coming to a chef and asking what's the best frozen dinner. It's never going to be so simple that there's one thing that you can use to tell. Okay? It's generally nice if somebody's ascendant is your 7th, is opposite to your ascendant. It's generally nice for things to be opposite. Why don't you order a compatibility report from my website? Because not only is it a compatibility report, but it's an explanation of how compatibility astrology works. So you have these basic principles like this is opposite. Oppositions are attractive. So when things get opposite to each other between the 2 people's charts, like say, for example, person A has something at 5 degrees Aries and person B has something at 5 degrees Libra. That's going to be attractive between the 2 people. Opposition is like that. Trine is more like friendly to each other. If person A has something at 5 degrees Aries and person B has something at 5 degrees Leo. Especially if the something in this illustration is the same thing. Like if person has Venus at 5 degrees Aries and person B has Venus at 5 degrees Sagittarius, then they'll just get along because that's the trine. And then there's the square which makes things difficult. So you can learn about those shapes from that report, or you can look on my YouTube for videos about this. And then you have to realize that if I have something at 5 degrees Aries and I have something else at 5 degrees Pisces or 5 degrees Aquarius, then this thing being opposite to that 5 degrees Aries might also make it square to this other thing that I have. There you go. Now you are actually talking realistically about how you can assess whether one person is compatible with the other person. And even that is going to miss the mark because it's still simplified, but it's going to get you into the ballpark the majority of the times. Alrighty. Garciela, for some reason your question attracted my attention. I have a question if you have time. Sorry, I did not go to email. Why does the Vedic study of astrology consider Rahu and Ketu planets, considering the contact point of the ecliptical? It doesn't consider them a planet. It uses them as a point in the chart, but that doesn't mean that they're planets. It has other points like that too. All right, next. I don't know how I have any subscribers, to be honest with you, because I'm so grumpy. Hey Vic, what is your stance on stationary planets? How are they different from retrograde? Well, retrograde means moving backwards, and stationary means standing still. So that's how they're different. You're probably asking, like, how are they interpreted differently? What's the difference in the interpretation? Well, to understand it logically, you'd be best to look at it in terms of a transit, or look at it over a span of time. When a planet moves, it moves with a certain speed, and the speeds, except for planets like Sun and Moon. See, Graziella, Sun and Moon are considered planets, or they're used as points. Actually, there's 5 planets in Vedic astrology, 2 luminaries, and 2 nodes. But all the points together are called grahas. Anyway, if you a planet besides Sun and Moon, planets move with varying speed because, technically speaking, because the Earth itself is also moving. And so there's a dynamic situation going on with how things approach and separate from each other. So the reason they move at different speed, and if you go over something very quickly versus if you stay there for a long time, you have a different amount of effect on something, right? If you just go through somebody's life for 3 seconds, you probably don't have that much effect on them, even if you're very impressive. But if you stay in the person's life for their entire life, even if you're not that impressive, you probably have a huge effect on them, right? So it's the same thing with the speed of planets. The slower a planet's going, the more it affects the point that it's at. And a planet can't go slower than standing still. So that's the import of stationing, or being stationary. Is that the planet becomes very weighty and heavy. It is important in a birth chart, but it's extremely important in transits when you're looking at how to interpret transits to somebody's birth chart. Retrogression is just a point in between the stations. So in other words, a planet will move forward quickly and then slow down, and then slow down, and then stop, and then move backwards, and then speed up, moving backwards, and then slow down, and then stop, and then move forward, and then speed up, and then repeat that cycle. Depending on which planet it is, it'll have different intervals. Alrighty, hopefully that has provided some insight. Here we have KM asking a couple of grand questions. 1. Internet-based platforms have aided proliferation of astrological content over the past few years. The pandemic, along with the growth of conservative politics across the world, has particularly enhanced the appeal of astrology. As a practitioner of astrology, did you anticipate this, say, around 8 years or so? I don't think you have to be a practitioner of astrology to anticipate that the internet would cause proliferation of communication or proliferation of information. So yeah, I think everybody understood that. And conservative politics, I'm sure you're talking from India, where astrology is something from the conservative sector. But in the rest of the world, it's not a conservative thing. Anyway, question number 2, can astrology contribute to making the world a fairer place to live in, curing the world of social evils like hatred, inequality, violence, and the like? If so, how? Astrology can't do anything. Astrology is not a person. Astrology is a tool. So it's up to people to do things. And astrology is a tool that they'll use to do the things that they want to do. So whatever astrology can do depends upon the person using it. Linda Goodman can use astrology to do something. Narada Muni can use astrology to do something else. So it really depends on the person entirely and not the tool. Okay, I do believe that if you understand, even like saying if you understand astrology, you'll probably understand the interconnectedness of everything and the blah, blah, blah. But actually that also just depends on the person. Knowledge is not a person. People are people, and they gain knowledge, and then they filter the knowledge through their personhood, through their personality. So some people are going to just see it as a way to plan out a war better. Okay, next. This is from JR. Couple of questions. 2 questions. That seems like it's the popular thing to do, is ask 2 questions. 1. How important are the concepts of functional benefic and functional malefic in a chart? Are they essential or secondary? They're confusing, in my opinion. One of these days I'm going to find out what these terms are a translation of, because I really haven't stumbled on it yet. This is a very, very secondary consideration, which if you went to the correct kindergarten or first grade, you would already know, because it would be built into your understanding of rising signs. So essentially, a functional benefic, the concept of functional malefics and benefics versus inherent malefics and benefics, is simply the idea that planets function differently because of the houses that they own. The concept of inherent maleficence and beneficence is based on the idea that planets have different natures. Saturn has a different character than Venus. Saturn's character is stern. That's the meaning of malefic. Venus's nature is generous. That's the meaning of benefic. So that's inherent character, but then there's also acquired character by virtue of what house the planet owns. The lord of the 8th house, the lord of the 6th house, the lord of the 12th house is going to have a nature which is similar to a Saturn. Lord of the 3rd house is going to have a nature which is similar to Mars. 6th probably a little bit Mars too, right? So they're going to have that hard or malefic nature, whereas Lord of the 9th is going to have a character similar to Jupiter or Venus, because it's the Lord of the 9th. So that is important. But if you understand that Aries has the sun as the 5th lord and Jupiter as the 9th lord and 12th lord, but primarily this is where Multrikona is important. Primarily the 9th lord. Then you already know that. You already know that Jupiter is friendly in an Aries chart. So you don't have to make more of a deal out of it than that. But my recommendation with the whole functional benefic and malefic thing is whoever came up with this term, functional benefic and malefic, did a great disservice to everybody, because it's just begging for misunderstanding. It's begging to be misunderstood. Just remember, just why even bother having this categorization of functional benefic and malefic? Just say the Lord of the 8th house and you already know. It's like the 8th house. All right, so just bear in mind that the planet owns a house, and the house that the planet owns is part of the planet's character in that chart. Okay? So I guess my question is kind of my answer is equivocating on this. Because on one hand I'm saying they're secondary, on one hand I'm saying they're essential. But so to clarify that, I wish we could just throw out this term functional benefic and malefic, just get rid of it and don't use it anymore. But the lordship of a planet is essential. Second question from JR. What do you make of Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto? Do you ever make interpretations with them? No, nobody does. Oh, whoops. I mean, nobody of classical astrology. No classical astrologer does. And the reason is that you cannot see or calculate these positions for Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Ah, but you say, but we can, because we have telescopes. Yes, I say, you have telescopes, but do you know how long human history exists for and how much of it the telescopes exist for? Astrology isn't something that's invented in the 19th century or the 18th century or the 16th century. Astrology is something permanent within nature. It's the way that the divine universe communicates to the divine humans. It's one of the ways. And it's meant to be done by human natural tools, things that you can see. No, I don't. And actually, I think it's kind of ridiculous. Especially to see something which is supposed to be classical, like Vedic astrology, to see when the Vedic astrology societies are teaching people about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Yet they're so blasphemous about the idea of the tropical zodiac. But they're like right in bed with Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Get out of bed with Uranus. All right. Next up. This is from RC. I've seen your open Q&A and I wanted to ask, what advice would you give to a person who grew up in an American Christian home but is actively trying to understand themselves, consciousness, and of course Vishnu? How do I approach Vishnu respectfully and properly? Because I'm not familiar with Vedic culture, but internally I'm fixated on it currently. Okay. So all you have to do is do Vedic things. That's all. Vedic culture will teach itself to you. And what is a Vedic thing? What you can do? You should hear the Vedas. And what is it that you said you're doing? You said, currently I'm watching your Srimad Bhagavatam streams. That's what you need to do. Just do it interactively or deeply. Take notes about it, think about it, contemplate about it, figure out what you do and don't understand about it, ask questions about it, apply it, try to see if it's real, try to see if it makes sense. It doesn't matter if you're from an American background, Christian background, Jewish background, Hindu background. That's what you have to do. All right. Next question from GBS. GBS, that sounds cool. GBS is a yoga teacher and wants to know, a yoga teacher who's into astrology and wants to ask, how far can they really help us? What are the limits in this task? Again, yoga is not a person. Yoga is a thing. Astrology is not a person. Astrology is a thing. You're the person. How far something can help you depends on you. How well you use it, what you use it for, how deeply you use it, etc. Next is a question from NK. Hi Vic, you mentioned question number 1. There's 2 questions here. You mentioned in one live stream that you actually check to see that I'm actually on the air. God knows if I am or not. Where is it even? Here it is. Okay. You mentioned in one live stream. Oh yeah, I see what I did there. Now I understand. All right. Sorry for the distraction. Back to this question from NK. You mentioned in one live stream that you actually think D7 might show a person's marriage more so than D9. You have any updates on your research into that? Very interesting. What the D9, the Navamsha, is a secondary manifestation of the 9th principle. It's the 9th house. The D7 is a secondary principle of the 7th. The 9th house is about Dharma, and the 7th house is about Mituna, or communion, interaction with people. 9th house is about morality. So if you want to know about marriage is a combination of the 2 things. Okay, like just sexuality is not really involving the 9th house per se. Doesn't need to involve the 9th house. It's just 7th and some other stuff, like 8th, 7th, etc. But marriage is where you make promises, vows, etc., etc. So that's very 9th housey. So this is why typically you look at the Navamsha. What you see in a Navamsha is not the person's marriage, but you see their morality, their ethics. Practically, the major way that a person is or isn't truly religious is not in how many times they go to church or how many mantras they say, but how responsible they are in their marriage. And that is an eye-opener. It's because marriage is one of the only remaining religious sanskars, or what do they call them in Christianity? Something sanctus or something. You know, like, what is it called? Christening, confirmation, marriage, funeral. Really, the only one which is really long-lasting and when you're alive is marriage. So the D9 is not really about anything like your love life or anything like that, but it's about love, morality, truthfulness, virtue, which is essential to marriage. 7th D7, which is like the 7th house, shows you more about how you interact with people. So you need to look at them both. So question 2 is kind of perhaps already answered. How do you recommend reading the D9? I've heard and read that the D9 first house, if it is actually the 9th house, and every house after that is the 10th, 11th, etc. I've heard people say it's not like D1. So don't try to use the same understanding of houses when looking at D9. I don't know where they got that idea from. They're trying to say, this is new, I never heard this. So they're trying to say that the first house of the Navamsha is the 9th house. So the second is the 10th, the 11th. That doesn't make sense. I have not seen that supported by any classical author. But it does have some truth to it. The first house of any divisional chart is like the spokesperson for that divisional chart. Just like the first house for your main chart is like the spokesperson for the house, for the whole chart, right? So the first house of a divisional chart will be like the chairman or the spokesperson for that chart. So the first house of a D9 is very pertinent to the subjects of the D9, which are the ninth house, which is ninth house. Similarly, the first house of D7 is very pertinent to the subjects of the seventh house. But that doesn't mean that therefore the second house is the 10th and the third is the 11th. Okay. Now we have questions from somebody that I have seen their name here in the chat as well, so I know they're here today. IJ. Let's see. If possible, can you clarify something you said? IJ, how can you ask a question like that? That is so dumb. I'm just kidding. I just wanted to be typical Victor Care. If possible, can you clarify something you said multiple times? That planets get affected by what happens near them, even if it's across a border. For example, Rahu is to the end of the third house and the cusp of the fourth house is at 2 degrees. This will make Rahu strong, but will this strong Rahu only affect the third house or will it affect the fourth house as well? So let me clarify what the question is. Proximity to things makes you influence things, obviously, right? The other way is by aspect. But actually, your proximity to a point also will define your aspect points. So let's just say proximity to things gives you the ability to influence them. So if you put a planet near the cusp like the ascendant degree, the important point in a house, then that planet becomes influential. Now, sometimes two planets can be near each other, or if you put, like, say, Jupiter near the moon, then the moon and Jupiter are going to have a lot of influence on each other. So sometimes that nearness between the planets, like, for sure, I've seen this many times, where you just look at the chart on paper really fast and you see Saturn in one house and Mars in the other house. And you don't realize that they're conjoined. But when you look at degrees or you put it on a circle chart, you all of a sudden realize they're like right next to each other. Because Saturn is at 2 degrees of one sign and Mars is at 29 degrees of the other sign. So they're 3 degrees apart. So sometimes the closeness is obvious as they're in the same sign, but sometimes the closeness straddles the border of something. So that's what this question is about. So to reiterate that, the border is a significant thing. It's not an insignificant thing. So having a border in between two planets separates them, but it doesn't obliterate their closeness. Like if I am right up against the wall and somebody else is right on the other side of the wall, that wall puts a big barrier in between us, but you can still interact. If I was far away from the wall, another person was far away from the wall, it would be totally, right, unable to interact. So think the border of the sign like that. If you were on one side of the wall and I was on the other side of the wall versus if we were in the same room that far apart, it'd be hugely different. But being close together and separated by a wall, you're still close together and you could still interact with each other, but it's muted by the wall. So just bear that into mind, that the border itself will like add distance. And if you're doing it mathematically, you can just add a certain number of degrees, you figure out a constant value. Now, the second part of the question is if this applies to a house cusp. So if simple analogy, if Rahu is right on the cusp of the third house, remember it's a whole sign cusp, so it doesn't mean the border. It means the sensitive point of the house, which means the ascendant degree. Right? So let's say the ascendant is at 28 degrees of Leo. And let's say that Rahu is at 27 degrees of Libra. So that means it's 1 degree away from the cusp of the third house. Leo, Virgo, Libra. 28, 28, 28. 28 Libra is the cusp of the third house. Rahu is at 27. So that means Rahu is really in the third house. It's really in the third house. That's a simple example. Now his question is, okay, keep the ascendant at 28 Libra. But put Rahu at 2 degrees Scorpio. Now, Rahu is very far away from 28 degrees Scorpio. It's 26 degrees away from 28 degrees Scorpio. But it's very close to 28 Libra. It's 4 degrees away from 28 Libra. So what house is Rahu in? Well, just visualize it. That's all you have to do is visualize it, and the answers become clear. Imagine a room, a big room, and you're right up against the wall, and there's another person right up against the wall of the other room. And there's somebody in your room also who's all the way on the other side of the room. And everybody is making some kind of noise or signal to you. You're going to, that thing, you're going to be noticing both of them. The person on the other side of the wall is banging on the wall, and the person in your room is also talking to you. You're going to notice both of them tapping on the wall or whatever. So it's like that. Rahu will actually be affecting the third house cusp in this example, but be in the fourth house. So it will have the interpretations of being in the fourth house, but that effect will go onto the third house. So it's going to have a complicated effect. It's like it's in two houses. All right. HK. How to interpret the nodes in Navamsha by sign house or both? Both. Why? The subcharts are charts. The reason why they're drawn out as charts is because they're charts. So the same way that any chart technique that you use in a subchart. Otherwise, it wouldn't be drawn out as a chart. Now, JQF. I think discussing about conjunctions can benefit many people. What is your approach on this? I often get the sense that interpretations indicate one planet fades the other. And other times interpretations go towards amplifying. I find particularly difficult interpretations like Venus, Jupiter, Moon, Saturn, or even those involving Rahu, Ketu. Well, I think planets have different characters, because just like people have different characters. So you take one person and you put them with somebody else, and they, amplify the other person. You take another guy and put him with the same person, and they overshadow the person. So there's no rule about how people interact. It's the people themselves that determine how they interact. Similarly, there's no ubiquitous, or what do you call it, uniform rule about conjunctions. It's the nature of the planet that's joining with the other one that will determine the conjunctions. So basically the way to work on conjunctions is this. First of all, how conjoined are they? Then the conjunction is more or less important. If you have two planets in the same sign, it's not a big deal, necessarily. Maybe one is at 1 degree and one is at 29 degrees. They're not very conjoined at all. But the closer that these two planets get, the more they're conjoined. So you don't have to spend a lot of time interpreting a Venus-Jupiter conjunction where Venus is on one side of the sign and Jupiter's on the other side. But if you're actually getting them close together, then those conjunctions become more important. So here you go. Here's how you start unraveling multiple conjunctions, like triples and quadruples. You look for the ones that are the tightest ones. Secondly, you use Bala here. Use Shad Bala. It becomes important here in conjunction. Shad Bala is a measurement of the planet's strength. So the same, like when you have two people interact, then this one who has a more dominant personality will be the one that dominates the interaction. and the other one will support or receive the interaction. So if you have Jupiter, Venus conjoining with Venus has the higher bala in that chart, then Venus is going to be overshadowing Jupiter, fading Jupiter, dominating Jupiter, influencing Jupiter. More than Jupiter will be influencing Venus. The other thing, once the conjunctions start to get close, like once they start to get within, let's arbitrarily say 3 degrees, then you want to look at declination also. Declination is northness and southness versus the usual measurement that we take, which is eastness and westness. The planet which is north, more north, it amplifies their bala. To be more north, it'll be higher up, gives you more influence. So a planet with a lower bala but a higher declination, that bala gets increased. So it might become more influential than the other planet. Then as for when is it that the planet will amplify the other? That's usually the case only for Rahu and Ketu. These guys will amplify. For Rahu is the keyword, which is very good, is amplify. Ketu, a better keyword, is intensify. Okay. Let's go to the next question. How many more do we got? Quite a few. My question is, what, if any, types of scientific studies could be done to demonstrate the validity of astrology to the existing scientific community? Let me ask you this. What kind of studies are done at all in science? So understand the type of the study. Very, very minute details can be proven of things which are very, very simple, like motion. And basically all physics is based on that. And then from physics, all the cosmology. So astrology is not really about physical objects like atoms. Astrology is about people and their behavior. So for that, it's more analog to a science or a subject like psychology or sociology or philosophy. How do you prove one of those sciences? Astrology is not alone in it being something which is not well provable by empirical scientific experimentation. Neither is sociology. Neither is anything which doesn't deal with things that have millimeters and centimeters, etc. So you can't. You will have to have such, first of all, you will have to have such a good understanding of astrology that you'll be able to break down to something that could be demonstrable. And you would have to have such a good understanding of astrology that you can devise an experiment with enough criteria to it that it would be realistic. Just to example, you could say, let's see if people that are born between July 21st and August 21st are leaders. And if you do that and you take a sample, actually there's data out there that does show some basic correlation. I forget the name of this report, but it is a pretty famous report. Probably other people know the name of this report. There is a significant research that was done, and there was significant data that showed a impressive correlation even just between sun signs and people's nature. But if it's not impressive enough for you, do you really have to scratch your head to figure out why? First of all, what is the quantification of whether or not these people are good leaders? It's a hard thing to measure. And second of all, It's just their sun sign. Don't you care at all about the ascendant? Don't you care at all about the moon? Don't you care at all about Jupiter, Venus, Mercury? So now you're going to have to devise a very elaborate experiment to see if certain criteria match leaders. So it's very, very difficult. I personally don't think it's worth it because the people that are not very concerned about empiric proof for things don't need it anyway or don't want it anyway. You just make a fake experiment and they'll accept it. Or you just do no experiment and they'll just believe it anyway. The people that do care about empirical proof are so hardcore and rigid that they don't even accept that psychology is actually a science. So how are they going to accept that astrology is a science? So it's barking up the wrong tree to try to prove astrology to somebody else. Okay, next question. Let me see what the question is. What in the birth, this is from TS, what in the birth chart shows that it would be the last birth for the native, or she would attain salvation or moksha? Is it possible to have plenty of desire due to heavy 11th house influence from Rahu and yet attain moksha? Oh, moksha is not... It's not like graduating from high school. Like, moksha is the rarest thing. People expecting that they're going to get, like, a chart that shows that they're going to get moksha. It would be easier to get a chart that's going to show you're going to be the President of the United States. Much, much easier. So, to get moksha, you have to have all indicators showing that you are disinterested in sensual world and very influenced by morality and very intelligent. If you only have one of those three, it's not moksha. It's depression, or it's genius, or it's religiosity and piety. You have to have all three of those things to the extreme. Generally, it is not possible to get moksha with any desires because your desire is something that you're not giving up. Okay, I hope that answers your questions. KC asks a question. Have you ever read any birth charts that right off the bat you knew what this person was supposed to be doing? Or they have a clear-cut chart of an athlete or singer? Yeah, like yours. And if you have, what that in a sense means is their destiny to pursue that career. Actually, I personally believe that every single chart is extremely obvious. But you or I may not have the recognition of what's obvious in it. Like, once you remember the books in the doctor's office when you went to pediatrics, it was the highlights. And they had to find the pencil in this picture, and there was a picture of a beach. And there was no pencil in the beach, but all of a sudden you found the pencil and it was inside the tree. And then you're like, look at that pencil. I can't stop seeing this pencil. That's the way perception works. So, like, if you don't know about Raja Yoga, and you look at a chart and you're like, well, what is it about this chart? I can't. But once you know about Raja Yoga and you look at a chart, oh, this is so obvious. So I personally believe that every chart is obvious, but we don't have the information that allows us to see what's obvious in every chart. But I've seen many charts which were obvious. My favorite one was, it it was just a report, right? So I was just really quickly just entering birth data and producing a report and sending it to the person. But this chart was so obvious that it caught my eye even in that like 30 seconds, 30 less than 30 seconds that I'm looking at it. And I was like, wow, who is this person? This is not an ordinary person. This person is powerful. And so for some reason I took a little bit of time and I said, your chart is pretty outstanding. Like, you mind telling me? And this person was the mayor of like some city or something. They answered me. So yeah, there are many charts are very outstanding, but it's not really a question whether or not the charts are outstanding. Your chart is, if it's very clear cut. Like if it's very clear cut that this person could not be anything but an athlete. Or this person could not be anything but a musician. Have you ever seen those? Yeah, like I said, like your chart. Very clear-cut athlete. It's never like 100%. It could only be this. Because how many people do you know that only have one interest? Like literally only have one interest. They only do one thing for their entire life. And then your question is, if this is the case, if you see a chart where it's very clearly like, wow, this person really should be an athlete, does that mean that it's their destiny? It's always your destiny. That's what the chart is all about. If you have a chart where it's like all over the place, and by the way, most of the times you don't get readings from people with really clear-cut charts. Because people with really clear-cut charts usually lead pretty clear-cut lives, and they don't have to ask questions. So you may see these really clear-cut charts, but you usually don't get them coming to you as clients asking for help about what career to choose. Usually the people that come to ask you, what career should I choose, or where should I live, or who should I marry, or etc., is people who have not clear-cut karma for that. And to have a not clear-cut karma is also your destiny. I'm going to go to the next question from JS. Another two-questioner. People love two questions. Maybe they feel like one question is missing an opportunity and three questions is asking too much. One, as you mentioned earlier, that Venus does well in the 12th house, but what if Venus is the Lugna Lord and debilitated in the 12th house? You don't have to ask these questions. You know that first lord in the 12th house has its interpretation. You know that debilitation has its effect, and you already know that you have to cook a recipe, not eat the individual ingredients. There's actually more than two questions in here. Well, debilitation gets canceled if a planet is exalted in the Navamsha. Why would you say canceled? You don't have to say canceled. You have only a mind that can only handle one digit at a time? I know you have a bigger mind than that. Can't you have a mind that can figure out that something can be on or off or somewhere in between? You don't just have a digital mind, do you? You can deal with spectrums, right? So it's not that a planet has to be debilitated or not debilitated. A planet has a spectrum of dignity. If it's debilitated in one Varga and it's exalted in another Varga, then it has an average dignity as a result of the two, and it will be exalted in the area of life signified by the Varga where it's exalted, and debilitated in the area of life signified by the Varga where it's debilitated. Question 2, you mentioned that retrograde planet is posited well. If posited well, makes one a king. Does it apply to Uranus and Neptune retrograde at all? I'm sure it would if Uranus and Neptune were to be used. Next question from ST. ST. What planet is associated with sex, Mars or Venus? Well, my friend, sex is something with many facets to it. There's many aspects to it, or there's many approaches to it. Not everybody. I mean, that is not true only of sex, but true of everything. But since you're asking about sex, let's talk about that. So why do you think that again, do you have a mind that can only handle one thing? I know that you're a human being and you have an intelligent mind and you can handle more than one thing at a time. Why do you think there has to be only one planet that is associated with sex? Like, are you really looking to eat a recipe with one ingredient? You think that's going to be tasty? So, Mars, Venus, and Moon are the 3 planets that have a huge impact on sex and sexuality. Mars is like the stereotypically masculine sexual experience. Venus is the stereotypically feminine sexual experience. And Moon is interesting. Moon is like the background, or the canvas for the whole thing. So, to give it a little bit more, the actual fuel or the power to engage in sexuality is represented by Mars. So what will be the actual power for it? You know, it takes effort and you have to have vitality. When you're sick or old, you can't really do it as well. So that's what Mars is all about. The vitality, the energy, the power that's required for it. And Venus is the ability to actually be there, to actually experience it, to actually get in it, to actually dissolve into it and experience it. Experiential of sexuality is in Venus, not in Mars. The drive of it is in Mars, not in Venus. And Moon is the basic background because Moon is where passion resides and where experience resides. So the quality of the Moon will usually influence the ability to enjoy sex and the interest in enjoying sex. Then the other planets, they just have some peripheral role to play in this topic. And ST has another question. How does triplicity denote the same element in 12 zodiac signs? I don't know what that means, but it is called a triplicity because it's called a triplicity because there's 3 of them. So, for example, by the way, I didn't invent these terms and I don't like them. I think they're stupid and confusing. But the reason why people call the elements triplicities because Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, fire, Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, earth, 3, right? Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces, water, Libra, Aquarius, Gemini, air. So it's a triplicate of each element. So they're called the triplicates or the triplicities. Whereas the modes, they call the quadruplicities because there's 4 to each. I think that's confusing, but that's why that word is used. I don't know if that was your question. Why does the zodiac sign share the same element with the zodiac sign that it trines? I think for all of this question, you must not have noticed that I put out a video series called Is Astrology Beautiful? Or sometimes I may have called it The Simple Beauty of Astrology. And in that series is a very elaborately illustrated and beautiful explanation answering your question. Next question from our favorite SB. Should Rahu and Ketu be used in yogas that involve a malefic? Or not, since they aren't technically planets? Your question is, if you have a yoga which is described as like, should a malefic planet conjoin the ninth lord, blah, 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 then should Rahu and Ketu be taken to fulfill that? No. Victicare's answer is no. And the reason for that is they're not malefics. And the source material for that is Phaladipika. Phaladipika does not categorize Moon, Rahu, or Ketu as being either benefic or malefic. It categorizes Venus and Mars as benefic and malefic, Saturn and Jupiter as malefic and benefic, and then secondarily, and then tertiarily, Sun and Mercury, malefic and benefic. Use those planets. You can even ignore Sun and Mercury if you want to make it even more simple. So where yoga says it needs a malefic, you need Saturn or Mars. And where it says it needs a benefic, you need Venus or Jupiter. That's it. That's your whole question, SB. That was easy. We only have 2 left, but that's good because we're already at the time limit. Could you share your thoughts or techniques on interpreting planets at critical degrees? There's a different definition of critical degree than the one you're using. You give 1, 2, and 29 as examples of critical degrees. There is an actual principle of critical degree, which is called Mritbhaga, which is different for each planet in each sign, and I don't have it memorized. But what you're saying is, how do you interpret planets that are on Bhav Sandhi? How do you interpret planets that are on the border? And we talked about that already. When we talked about the example of Rahu being on one side of the wall and the house cusp being on the other side of the wall. And then the final question, unless another email comes in before this one gets done. A few years back, you were doing a study of Ketu and Barney. Can you share your findings? I don't remember that study. Sorry. That was a letdown question. So yeah, that's that. Okay, guys. All right. I'm going to save my brain and just to end here to help you guys enjoyed it. Space bug. Okay, guys. I'll see you later. Sabian symbols, I think they're the best symbols, although Zildjian might be a little bit better. Thank you.